This shiur is an overview of the Maamar Vayehiyu Chayei, as well as a discussion of a few key points that are negated Avon of the Maamar. So it's useful for getting a general picture before you learn it, but I think it will be fully appreciated if you have already learned the Maamar and you're looking to put it all together. But it can be used either way. So the general teich of the Maamar is Simcha and Avodas Hashem. What that means, how we accomplish that, how important it is. In Ois Gimel, the Rebbe talks about the chshivus of Simcha. Simcha means your avodah is b'shleimus. What does that mean? L'chayra, a yid is doing what he has to do, ma'aseh b'payil, tut. But if there's missing simcha, there's missing a chayis, sefel de pnimius. Mashaking when it's b'simcha, there's a shleimus, there's a completeness, a wholeness, a wholesomeness in your avodah. Al derech zeh, the Rebbe says at the end of the hayis, another nekuda, that when you have simcha, it triggers hamshachas al likus lamata. What's the svara to that, l'chayra? Because if a person is serving the Eibishter, but it's shalom teich simcha, his avodah is just within himself. You see, b'muchash, when somebody's with simcha, there's a tnu of hashpah, there's a tnu of hispashtus. We'll talk about that later, in a positive sense. So when a yid is in a certain ma'amad matzav, we know that that's ma'ir kegavna de la'ela, and it's ma'ir kegavna de l'sata. Whatever you do l'mata, that's triggering l'mayil Hashem tzilcha. So when a yid is in a tnu of hashpah, that also triggers gila l'kus mitzad ha'eibishter, and that's after when a yid is b'simcha. That's why it's important to have simcha. In Ois Vav, the Rebbe talks about how to get to simcha. What is taka the geirim? What causes simcha? What's an eitzah to get to simcha? And the Rebbe says something which he says in many maamorim, but it's still a little bit counterintuitive. It doesn't seem to be what you would think. That simcha is dafke through bittul, anova, bittul. Now l'chayre simcha and bittul are two opposites. Simcha is more of a spashtus, like was mentioned earlier, and it's an union of hagbah. It's a certain feeling of reimus that a person feels, a certain breitkeit. Mashen kein bittul is the opposite, shiftless, a person feeling low, feeling not a metzius. How does that go together with simcha? Ad kedei kach, they were saying that bittul actually enhances, even causes the simcha. What does that mean? So the nekudas union, based on what the Rebbe says over here, is like this: that when a person is margish himself, margish his own metzius, so the attitude is, everything succumbed to me, everything is coming to me, I'm expecting the world. So b'meila, you're never happy, you're never satisfied. Even let's take it b'pashtus, if somebody's working in a company and he's getting paid, he's not b'simcha that he got a paycheck. He might appreciate it, and he should, but the simcha, it's expected. If they don't pay him, they're even on baltolin. They have to pay him. So he doesn't feel like, wow, this is amazing. He doesn't feel a tunu of simcha. They owe it to him. And therefore, somebody who has that feeling, succumbed to him, because of his yashus, he'll always feel that whatever he gets, I'm supposed to get it. And not only am I supposed to get whatever I got already, but I want even more, and I want everything. I'm never satisfied. On the other hand, somebody who's in a tunu of bittul, a tunu of anava, so he feels that he doesn't deserve anything. And he feels that everything that he's getting is a matana from the Eibishter, it's a chesed of the Eibishter, and it's all nevach noki, it's mamash all pure profit. And b'meila, that's why he's b'simcha. That's the pashta nakuda. Also, the chayr part of this is that when a person is in a tunu of bittul, he's not thinking about himself so much. So b'meila, whatever he has, he's satisfied with. He's mistapid b'muat. If somebody's coughing as a chesed metzias, so he wants to continue to make his metzias more comfortable and to give himself more luxuries. That's the nekudah of why bittul causes simcha. Now the main nekudah that I would say of the Maamar, and the main part which needs to be learned more carefully and to be understood, is what exactly does simcha mean, and what is the correct type of simcha that Torah is demanding, that Chassidus is demanding, that this Maamar is telling you that you should have. And that's explained in Birkus of Gimel and Daled. So we're going to go a little bit more into that, and we're going to put a little bit more time to try to understand it. So in Sif Gimel, at the end, the Rebbe says like this: that the correct type of simcha is when it's in a way of bittul. But if the simcha is in a way of murgush, that you're very conscious of it and you feel it very much within your metzius, that could cause you to have a full feeling of yashus. And then it could even lead to dvarim built to the tzui, which l'chayr means that it could actually make you do things that are not according to the kavanah al-yayna because of the yashus that's getting involved and clouding a person's judgment, and he ends up not doing the right thing. And therefore, there has to be simcha, but it has to be gilu bir ada. The gilu, the simcha has to be still with a trembling, with a certain kabbalah soil, with a certain yira, and that's the way the simcha is done in the correct way, not in a way of murgush, but in a way of bittul. This is the last paragraph of Gimel, which is a big yesod of the Maamar. Now, obviously, we're talking here about simcha d'kedusha. There is a simcha, I don't know if it's really called simcha, but there is a tnua that seems to be similar to simcha, which is haylulus, litzanas. That's already klippa, and sometimes that actually could be confused, but it's quite different. I think it's one of the things that it says that there's a fine line between them, but they're polar opposites. Haylulus is wildkeit. Haylulus is prikasel. Haylulus is completely focusing on my metzias, and my metzias going wild. Simcha that we're talking about, simcha de kedusha, is the opposite. Simcha is a dveikus with the Eibishter. Simcha is a feeling that you're connected to the Eibishter. Just a hamchasha. Imagine if somebody remembers or watching a video, you see the Rebbe with Chassidim in 770 by Fabrengen or in a Zman of Simcha, and sishturim sich, and there's a tnu of Simcha that's encompassing the room, encompassing everyone in the room. Everyone is riding that wave in that kach of Simcha. And it's in a very, very powerful way. It's a tnuah adira of Simcha. But that tnuah is not at all an akudah of anyone individually being mispashet in his metzias. Don't forget. There's a complete feeling of hecherkeit, a feeling that we're going higher than Elam Hazard, we're connecting to the Eibishter. We're completely not even shaykh to Yon Elam Hazard, to Taivus. It may be right after, unfortunately. But at that moment, you're riding a hecher wave. You're going to a higher place. And that's obviously what Simcha de Kedusha means. Not that the person is being mispashet, and it's his midas, built to the tzuyim that are being mispashet, but rather, like it says that's klippas plishtim, which is also ayinyan of haylulus and simcha de klippa. That's what's called plishtim, which is like mavi hamefulish, that it's open on all sides and everything is just going wild. It's not a tnu of bitla, a tnu of connection to likus, and he's not margish and oil. I heard from the Medal Aron that he said that the Rebbe Shab once, it was in the middle of Hakafes, I think he said, Simchas Torah, and he pointed out, obviously without making it obvious, to the Friedrich Rebbe, who was the Menal Peil of the Yeshiva, he said, look at those two Bachrim, was tanzen. He says, that Bacher, tanzt mit Prikasel. The other Bacher was dancing either right next to him or with him, tanzt mit Kabbalah. And it was nikir. You could see in the Tnuah, in the mood, in the nefesh of the Rikudim, you could see the Tnuah. One was Prikasel, one was Kabbalah. So that's what we're saying over here. Now the Rebbe is taking it a little bit further, and the Rebbe is saying, of course, it has to be Simcha de Kedusha. That the Maamar doesn't even say. I was just saying that for the purposes of contrast, that we should understand what we're referring to over here. But even within Simcha de Kedusha, the Rebbe is telling us that Ivdos Hashem Simcha has to be refined and defined, that it has to be in a way that it's not b'bchinas murgush. It has to be in a way of bittul. So, the Rebbe is saying, even if it's a correct Simcha, you have to bavarin that it shouldn't be in the way of murgush. And what's the problem with that? It could be leading to negative things. So it's kind of like 4 steps or 4 options over here. The correct simcha is simcha in a way of bittul. What the Rebbe is negating is simcha in a way of murgush, where your metzias is more felt. Not quite the extreme of prikasel and haylus. No, we're still talking about simcha of kedusha, but fart, his metzias is a little bit mispashet more than it should be. It's murgush, simcha in a way of murgush. That could lead to a third nekuda, that he's actually going to feel yashus in a full conscious way. Hagashas hayashus, Rebbe calls it. And that could even lead, obviously this means that it's nishtalshel. It doesn't mean like one immediately goes to the other. And another mind of the Rebbe says, "B'ribu yishtalshelus." It could lead one to another. This is the Maskal touching your base. It could lead to even Dvarim built to the Tzuyim. That means that he's even going to end up falling into Nyanim of Maisa B'Pel that initially said Darsh today. So, what does this mean? What is there Bavarin over here? Isn't Simcha by definition B'Bchinas Morgash? So in Chanam, I mentioned before the svara that bittul has to be there to get you to be b'simcha, but simcha and murgash l'chayra go hand in hand. You can have just bittul, just kabbalah soil. But if you're saying that you should be b'simcha, simcha l'chayra means a tnuah v'spashtus. Simcha l'chayra means a certain breitkeit. So you're full of chayes, you're mispoil, you're misragish. So what is the Rebbe saying, and why is the Rebbe saying that simcha b'chinas murgash is a problem? And what exactly is the Rebbe demanding? What type of simcha is the correct simcha? That's one akudah that needs to be understood. So l'chayra, what it means is like this: simcha, the correct way is that it should be in a way that you're losing yourself. It doesn't mean that you're quiet. It doesn't mean that you're just standing there with a tnu of fakvetchkeit. Befeish means simcha, but hagufa has to be in a way that you're falling zich in a likus. Go back to the dogma that I mentioned earlier of being besimcha with the Rebbe and the Rebbe's encouragement, and you feel the kedusha and the bittul and the kavan halyena, and where we're getting to what the simcha is about. If it's a yom tov or it's a certain yom pagra, and you feel befeish chayes, but you feel a chayes in a way that you're falling zich in the Rebbe, in the yonim of the Rebbe, and what the Rebbe wants from you, and what the Rebbe wants you to do. That's the tnuah that the Rebbe is referring to that it should be. There's a lashon that I mentioned before, Charisar Toshin Yud Beis, where the Rebbe says not always is it like that. A person can have simcha, but he's margish as somech, zich misamek. In other words, he's not letting go. He's feeling himself. He's feeling his ispashtos in the simcha. Now, even though we're talking about simcha de kedusha, which means that what's causing him to be with simcha is his tainug and elikus and his geshmak and elikus and his appreciation of the Eibishter. But nevertheless, the perlietz is that causes him to feel a simcha that's making himself feel a certain feeling of satisfaction and a certain feeling of excitement. That's about him. But not that he's feeling the fact that he's sameach and he's happy mitzad elikus. And that is already a certain akudah that's too much involving his metzias, which on that the Rebbe says it could lead to goshas hayashus, etc. And that's what the Rebbe says, but that don't have a b'chinas morgash, it should be in a way of bittul with a feeling of kabbalah soil v'gilu b'rada. So that's just to clarify what's the teichem of simcha that the Rebbe is telling us to have over here. What's the hagdar of it? Now in Eis Dalid, the Rebbe goes through the different dayas that were mentioned at the beginning of the Maamar, of Chava, the Noach, and then Sarah. That each one didn't work out until Sarah came along. So Eis Dalid, the Rebbe explains like this: that Chava, this was her mistake. She didn't learn this Maamar. She didn't internalize it. This nekuda that simcha cannot be in a way of murgash, she was missing that. So we're going according to the opinion that the Eitz Hadas was Eshka Shel Hanovim, which is Inyan of Simcha, Ya'inim Sameach. But the problem was that it was a way of Hagasha. That was the problem. Now, Noach is already the next shlav. He already knows what happened with Chava. He knows that it's a problem. And Noach is already trying to correct the problem. He wants to have simcha in the right way. As it comes from the Maamar. The Maamar says, Noach, if you look with his heart of 41, if you look inside the Maamar there, Noach rotzo l'saken es chet eitzadas, which means he recognized there was a chet. He recognized something has to be corrected, and he went ahead to try to correct it. What was the problem? And this is the way the Rebbe is defining chet eitzadas. It was all about inyan hagasha. That was the problem. What was the solution? And this is something which is, when you read it at first glance, it's l'chayr dvarim hastumim. It's very hard to understand what this means. The Rebbe says that Noach wanted to correct the problem of hargasha al yidei hargasha. What's meant this? We just said before that in order to have correct simcha, it should not be b'murgish, it should be b'bitl. So if you know the problem and you recognize it and you want to fix it, so what does it mean that Noach wanted to fix it and the problem was Hargasha by having Hargasha? He also had the Chayei. So it's also the idea of simcha. So how could you correct the problem by repeating the problem? By repeating the same mistake that was done before? How was that going to fix it? That was the mistake of Chava. If I can't, he should be Shayla Hargasha. So Aron Kamman, Noach definitely didn't do it correctly. Like also biyadei, it was a mistake. It didn't work. Because the correct way is, like was mentioned earlier, simcha and a way of bittul. And Sarah was the one that achieved that. Sarah had bittul. Rabbi explained the level of Sarah represents bittul. She was the one that corrected the problem, the original problem, and she did it in the right way, simcha and a way of bittul. Which means, b'pashtus, not in a way of murgish. Now here it gets even more complicated, a little bit more confusing. Because then, as the Rebbe continues, the Rebbe says, that ultimately she did have it in a way of murgish. Sarah, befeish, did have it in a way of murgish. It was gam b'murgish. And Adarabah, the fact that she was bottled allowed her to also have Hargasha. So now we're saying that you are supposed to have Hargasha. And Adarabah, that's actually going to come out of the bittul. So are you supposed to have Hargasha or not? Is it something good? Is it something positive or something negative? So just to try to make a little seder over here and to clarify this nakuda, the word is like this, l'chayim. In the beginning of a person's Avodas Hashem, well, rather before he starts his Avodas Hashem, before he starts his journey, the way a person is naturally born, he has yashus, he has his pashtus, he has to deal with it. And the yashus krichtarayin and every nakuda of his reality that dictates what he thinks, what he does, how he feels. When he's trying to make a mention of himself, like the Lashon and the Sichas of the Friedrich Rebbe, when he's putting himself on his own feet and he's starting to work on himself, Avei the Pnimis. So now he realizes, 1 second, I have to stop that. I have to hold back my yashus, my ispashtus. That doesn't mean he should be marash chayil. Of course, he has to be b'simcha. I was talking about simcha. But the simcha has to be in a tnu of Kabbalah Sel, being shaylel that his pashtus and that metzius and that yashus. Pashtus zayin a bittul dekriit. And that's what the Rebbe is saying, but pashtus in the beginning, the end of his gimel, when the Rebbe is clarifying what type of simcha is the correct one, the Rebbe says, gilu berada, simcha and wave bittul. That's the first stage. In this Dibur Maskal Tafshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe says that the simcha should be only bepnimius. Gilu berada means that you should only see his galus, what should be the snapshot of this chassid, of this yid, Kabbalah Sel. But the inside, he's full of chayas, he's full of simcha, mitzad Avodas Hashem. Mashenkin, if right in the beginning, a yid is going to start with retaining that ispashus that he was born with, that's already going to be his yashus. That's going to end up to be, like was mentioned before, Wildkeit, Pirkasayil, Heilulus. You're not going to have Avodas Hashem, which is Klidei Kamachzik, that you have to have a Tnov Bittul. However, that's at the beginning of Avodas Hashem, but that's not the tachlis. That's not the ultimate shleimus. Ultimately, Avodas Hashem doesn't only mean that you should just be shayla your metzius. The Eibishter wants, and He gave you your metzius for a reason. So ultimately, the Avodas Hashem darf durchnehmen. It has to penetrate. It has to carry through. It has to bring with it to carry and affect every part of you. That His metzius gufa v'asher husham should be durchgenommen with the bittul. And that's the nakuda, l'chayr, what the Rebbe is talking about, that the Rebbe says that ultimately it is supposed to come in a way of murgish, which means it has to affect you and penetrate through you durch and durch. Coming to the Kinnas HaShluchim, so maybe a dogma. We know that there's a concept of shlich. It's a shlich that the Rebbe instituted, that a shlich that was sent brings another shlich. Younger man looking for a shlichus, and he finds the shlich that's bringing him out. He has to see it. He has to pass if he's the right person for the job, for the shlichus. So let's say he has two younger light, He has one that is more like in the first Maamar Dematzig that I described earlier. He's still holding by his Hispashtus. And a feiner, tut gute Sachen, he's a Lebediker, but it's more Hispashtus. We're being honest that he has Hispashtus of his Metzias Tachen. You have another younger man, he's a Bitteliker, he's a feiner, Kabbalah Seil. Shlilis Hispashtus. No, so he has these two younger light to choose from. Which one should he take? L'cheira, I would say that they're both not the right man for the job. The first one, it's very nice that he's a Labudikir, but if it's about his Hispashtus, das is a Shliach. A Shliach means that is a Shluchai Shel Adam K'moisei. He has to be part and parcel of the Mashalach. He has to lose himself. It's the ultimate Nekudah of Bittul. What does it mean a Shliach? Und sein ganze Koch ist sich. That's a Stirim in Eubei. I heard once, if I'm not mistaken, recording of a Fabring where the Rebbe said, if a person goes in Miftzayim and tracht wegen sich, tracht nicht wegen jenem, wegen der Kavanah al jene, das heißt nicht Miftzayim. What does that mean? It's not a shlichus, it's doing your own thing. By the way, that doesn't mean that he can't be successful. He could go, the first younger man that I described, and he could be a good organizer, he could be lebedik, he could make a shturim, and he could make a program, and he could have a hashpah on a lot of people. The Rebbe's in Yonam can sich durchführen durch him. Kiyadua, we're not necessarily the way we should be. That doesn't stop the Rebbe's keiches from coming through us. But to be truly that the Gavre should be able to correctly define himself as Ich bin a Shliach, how could you say that if Sefeltem in Bittel? That doesn't work. So therefore, the second younger man is the man for the job. That is Taken Bottle, that is a Shliach. But Lidach Yisa, to be a successful Shliach, you need to have Hispashtus. You can't just be a Bitteldiker Yid that's sitting in a corner. You have to be able to express yourself and have that breitkeit. So what you really need is, you have a Keich van Hage. So what you really need is a third younger man. Or maybe one of these two will develop into the third. You need somebody that Taka has a Yesod of Bittel, but it's not just in the way that he put his Metzias away and he's in ganzen verstilt and he quieted himself down completely, but he took that Bittel and that Bittel penetrated him. That Bittel affected his Keiches HaGluyim. It's something that's what's making him tick. The Bittel is not putting him away and quieting him down. The Bittel is making him energized. The Bittel is taking him over completely. And when his Avedis Hashem is completely misatzim with him, Tchilas Aveda, that's the word. Tchilas Aveda, you can't do that. Tchilas Aveda, you have to put yourself aside. But once that your connection to the Eibishter becomes who you are, and it becomes your identity, then you can be mispashit. Because it's not about my spashtus, it's about that Yisoid Hadavar that I implanted on myself of Bittul is now being mispashit and coming out. And that's what the Rebbe says in many sichas, that Shliach b'toisvus eser, adding 10 is b'gematria Mashiach. We need to get to Mashiach, so we have to add 10, but it's not just adding 10. You find different ways to add numbers. There is masbir. Because Shliach means the bitl. Shlucha shaladim kameisei efalitzich. But that gufa has to be together, and it becomes one gematria that's equaling Mashiach. That is esekichas and nefesh are involved. If it's just esekichas and nefesh on shlichus, it's also not good. That would be his pashtus, possibly. That would be his metzias. But if it's the Yisrael Adover is Shliach, and then he adds onto that the Toishvus Eser, Adas is Begamatri Mashiach. That's what we're looking for. They say about the Shul David Reichik that whenever he would go into a shul, into a place, he would go to Mizrach. So either somebody asked him, or he explained himself, nicht as Zucht covered, but the Friedrich once told him, when he said Mashlichas, he told him, wherever you go, picture where would they seat me if I was there at that event. You go there. So, is that his pashtus? Of course it's his pashtus. But it's not his pashtus because he's blost von sich. It's his pashtus because he recognizes ich bin a shliach and I'm representing him shliach b'meila. That's why I'm in a full his pashtus and I'm going to be the one that's center in the limelight. And that's the nekudah of, like it says, the famous pasuk like Chassidus Taichus with vayigba libe b'darkei Hashem. There has to be hakabos halev in Avodas Hashem. It's not enough just to have shval ruach, just in need of shiftless alone. That's the Yisrael Adavar. But ultimately, it has to be vayik b'libay, but that guf is b'darkei Hashem and is Avodas Hashem. So, going back to the Maamar, Pshat in the Maamar, that could be what Noach was thinking. What does it mean that Noach wanted to be Mesaken Hargosha al Yidei Hargosha? Noach chapped this nekuda. He chapped that the ultimate goal is his pashtus, harchava, but in Avodas Hashem. The original Hargosha of the Chet Eitzadas was obviously not that. It was Murgush in the negative sense. Murgush of Klippa, let's call it. But let's get Simcha in a way of Murgush in a positive way, in Avodas Hashem. So that was his cheshbon. Oh, so let's be Mesaken the problem through Hargosha. It's not the same Hargosha as the one that was there before that Chava did. The problem of Hargosha was Hargosha Hayashus. He wanted to be Mesaken al Yidei Hargosha, in other words, Hargosha and Avodas Hashem. His pashtus of Kedusha. That's what he was looking for. And he took to get to that. It didn't work. So what was his mistake? Why it didn't work? So it seems from the Hemshech Advarim of the Eis, when we say about Sarah, how she achieved it, it's very clear that she first put an emphasis on Simcha b'Bechinas Bittul. She didn't jump. She didn't just go straight to Hargosha. That doesn't work. If a person is in a matzav of Murgush of Klippa, which means he's mispashet in a way of Kedusha, of Klippa, of Lumazah, you can't just flip it around. You can't just say, okay, now, yesterday my Ispashus was Klippa, today it's going to be Kedusha. First you have to deal with that Ispashus. You have to get rid of it. There has to be a shtickle iskafia first. Like it says in Chassidus, the Lashon, that to go from one ayin, from one yesh to another yesh, you can't do that unless there's an ayin be'emtza, like the famous marshal of a seed in the ground has to disintegrate. It's going from a seed to something completely new, to a full tree. So in between that, it goes into the ground and it disintegrates. It loses its tziyur. In order to be able to create a new murgush, a new mitzvah of yeshus, a yeshus of kedusha, you have to first dissolve that original yeshus, which is yeshus of klippa. Otherwise, he's connected so much to his ispashus of klippa that how could he all of a sudden transform that to kedusha? Whatever he's going to do, it's going to still be that original ispashus. He didn't get rid of it yet. Maybe a dugma ladavar. You have sometimes somebody that was not raised as a fruma yid, and he got involved in a certain industry, he had a certain chush and a certain inyan, a goyishkeit, and his neshama is neseirer, his niskaref to Yiddishkeit, and what he does is he says, okay, let's just flip it. Before I did this inyan and klippa, I'll flip it over to kedusha. I don't know if that really works. If it was some inyan of parnasa, a certain training, fine. But if it's an inyan of goyishkeit, a certain inyan of ispashtus of lumazah, the first thing you have to do is get rid of that ispashtus. You have to be able to have a certain level of iskafia. Then, possibly, when you rebuild again and you create yourself as an emes of fruma yid, who's an Eved Hashem, and you have simcha and a way of bittul, so fine, maybe you could then go back to that and use it out for kedusha. But to just simply flip it from one to the other, I'm saying that's al derech what Noach was trying to do, and it didn't work. Just take the Hargosha and flip it to Hargosha of kedusha. It doesn't work that way. Do you say that there has to be a nekud of ayin be'emtza? What do we see, Taka, what happened by Noach? He became shikr. Al derech hatzachus. Can we sagen that he was a chsein l'chaim, shtiyas yayin. So yayin has the ability to be ma'ir the keches pnimim, the idea of hergish. The chsein yayin yotzer seid, sitzt bei Verbrengen, that helps you get in the mode, helps you connect that your mitzvah should be durchgenommen with whatever's being spoken by the Verbrengen, the niggin, whatever's going through your mind. What's the hachra if it's going to work? If it's going to be taka a murgush of kedusha, or fakeret? The answer is if he has bittul. What's the nafkamina b'payil by Verbrengen? Amenemt nar fear, nishmer fear. Then the yayin is in a way of bittul. Then it's going to have a teyalis. Mashenkin, if not, is this yayin ha-mashakir. So why is this neichet genommen mevi fear, as I weiß this? He ended up in yin of shikrus. So that's the nekuda that we're saying that Sarah recognized that. Sarah realized what the problem was. So B'meila, she made the foundation of her Aveda, of Simcha, in the way of Bittul. Then, that's what Rabbi continues now, back to Hargosha. Why? Because that ultimately is the Kavanah. But the Hargosha at that point is already not connected to your Yashus. And that's the whole nichas of the Maamar. That goes back to the beginning, and then over here he explains again, it comes up later. That's the Lo Havachai. It was hers, it belonged to her. It's not just that she was B'shleimus, but it became hers. What's that nakud of Lo Havachai? That's a nakud of Murgish. That's something that the Pasuk sets apart and repeats Shnei Chai Yisara. because that's the chiddush, that not only did she have the hechstam adreges and kedusha, but it became hers. She owned it. It became part of who she was. That's the idea of the shleimos, that the simcha, once you have the yisod of bittul, that it should take to be in a way of murgish. It should affect your mitzvahs completely, and your whole, all of your keches nefesh, zolareis shrayin, that bittul. And then it's taking going to be a way of murgish. It's going to be something was nemder durch and durch with the breitkeit, with the full ispashtus, but it's still going to be a ispashtus of kedusha. It's going to be a union of vayigva libi b'dai Hashem.